Hi, I'm Jessie Petheram and I'm the curator of Another View here at the Lady Lever Art Gallery. It's an exhibition all about wonderful women artists painting landscape, and I'm going to have a look around today with Kathleen Soriano. So here we have something I'm really excited about because these are brand new acquisitions to National Museum's Liverpool's collections. It's a group of works by an artist called Elizabeth Campbell, who was not only an artist but was an archaeologist and an explorer. And the group of works that we've got are all from a sketchbook of hers which depicts her journey through the Alps in about the 1820s, 1827 we think this is.
Well, you do get that sense of her being an explorer, don't you? Because she's gone right out there into confronting nature. And this is, with these three, I sort of feel like you're almost encountering the idea of the sublime for the first time in the exhibition, that idea of nature being overwhelming potentially and dangerous but also beautiful at the same time.
And what I really love about it is the fact that we're seeing a woman going out and experiencing this, and I feel like we're led to believe that it was just men going and exploring.
David Friedrich.
Exactly, and you know, Wordsworth writing about going over the Alps, and you don't think of women doing it, but they clearly were. I think she was probably quite unusual, but I don't know if she was exceptional in doing that.
I mean, what I also love about this is, you know, it does really remind me of Caspar David Friedrich, and it's partly to do with the iconography of the trees. You know, when you look at something like that, it could almost be that crucifix that you see in the Caspar David Friedrich painting, but also the way in which there's hardly any sky. The viewpoint from right down here, there's this tiny bit of sky. It makes everything so monumental. Beautifully placed tree here in the left-hand side that sort of anchors and weights everything. And then the waterfall, there's something peculiarly anthropomorphic about it almost, don't you think?
Yes, it's almost got a body form to it,
Exactly.
definitely. Yeah, that very low viewpoint she's got, you feel so enclosed by it. And I really feel like you can feel her drawing it almost as if you're in that kind of place as well.
I also think they feel very modern.
They do.
I don't know whether it's to do with the coloration, but it's also to do with the structure of the composition and the way in which she treats the landscape. It's almost like a precursor of an artist who's working with symbolism, for example, you know, that she's really looking hard at the landscape. They're great.
Yeah, sometimes there's almost these slightly exaggerated forms, like you were saying about the body-like form of the waterfall, and yeah, I agree, there is quite a modern feel, and I think it's partly as well because, again, it's unlikely they'd been displayed before and looked at before, so they're in fantastic condition, and so to be able to have them on the wall is beautiful. So here we have our first oil painting of the tour we've looked at today, and this is by Ethel Walker, who's actually an artist better known for portraits, but this is one of her seascapes, which are also very important to her.
Do you think she might have been looking at Monet, maybe?
I mean, it looks like that, doesn't it? The brushstrokes are just fantastic. They have so much vitality. You can almost feel the sea kind of bouncing off.
And she's in the sea, isn't she? You sort of feel she's
like
gone right out into the water, and that sort of energy of the waves and the whiteness on the top. And of course, you know, do you think it was painted outdoors? I mean, the famous thing about Impressionists was they were able to paint en plein air because of the painting tubes that they could carry with them. I mean, do you think Ethel was working outside?
I think she did from time to time. So this is painted near her home in Robin Hood's Bay, so it's the full force of the North Sea.
Yeah.
And she wrote and she said that whenever she saw kind of a good day for painting, she would rush outside, which really implies that she was kind of taking everything with her and she wanted to capture it as she saw it. And it's again that lovely low viewpoint, like you can almost feel the waves crashing over her in some ways.
I mean, we often talk about the hierarchy of painting, don't we? Sort of oil paint and watercolour, but there's also a hierarchy of genre.
Definitely.
That with still life used to be sort of right at the bottom, and women would often do the still lifes, but that marine painting was something that would be quite high up there along with history painting. But of course, marine painting often had boats or ships in it, and it was, you know, you think about Turner, you think about those wonderful Dutch sort of sailing ships, but this is just about nature, isn't it?
I think all the women in this exhibition really show how silly those hierarchies and kind of restrictions are, because they seem to do things with them that completely disrupt our idea of it. So as you say, it's a marine painting, but it's also a landscape, it's also a seascape, so it kind of brings together all these different genres that perhaps traditionally were either not seen as fit for women or were not seen as important enough more generally, and make it something that you should focus on. So I love that idea that she's focusing on it, almost the detail of the sea, and really focusing on the kind of the emotion and the feeling as well.
And I read in the caption, she represented Britain at the Venice Biennale.
Yeah, exactly. She was also the first woman elected to the New English Art Club, which is very important. And I think that shows she was a hugely respected artist in her day.
I mean, I have to say the frame is also gorgeous. It's very period, isn't it?
Yes.
I love it when you get that match between something that's of a certain time and then the frame that sits so comfortably with it. It's beautifully put together. Okay, now, when I film Landscape Artist of the Year, and sometimes we get a painting out and people go, that's not a landscape, I'm going to do it to you. That's not a landscape. How did that get in?
Well, I wanted to show that how varied landscape art can be and how we might benefit from thinking about it in a different way.
Okay.
So I really love the fact that a lot of these artists do focus on the detail of a landscape, and I feel as though that knowledge of detail of a landscape can really help us to understand it. This is a wonderful etching by Anna Airy, who's better known actually as a war artist, but this is a very detailed examination of a plane tree. And I think it encourages us to look at the landscape in greater detail.
But botanical drawings as such, they were, going back to the hierarchy, they were right at the bottom as well, weren't they? Things that ladies did. I mean, here she's elevated it almost into, fine art. I mean, it really is. And she's even got a stamp in that sort of way of the Japonisme, she's sort of there saying, this is my imprint.
Yeah. She was a hugely varied artist as well, so this reflects her ability to move between different medium, which showed that she wasn't restricting herself as well in a way that perhaps people wanted women to be restricted.
Do you think she'd been looking at Japanese printmaking, for example, because you get that sort of that delicacy, but especially with the emptiness in the bottom left-hand side or down the centre, where there is stuff in it, but it's very sort of delicately observed. Do you think she'd been looking at Japanese printmaking like so many artists had at this time?
Yes, definitely. It's a very current influence at the time, early 20th century. And you're right, this beautiful detail of the seeds of the plane tree falling down. It shows how important Japanese art had become at this time and the influence it had. I love as well that it's quite different from what we've looked at already in this walkthrough, in that, firstly, it's the first print we've looked at and it's just black and white, and it really shows what you can do with the print medium and with the detail.
But it's got an incredible intensity in that black, hasn't it? It's sort of very, very rich. You look at it gets darker the lower down, but you go on the right-hand side and paler in the top left. It's almost like you can feel the weight of those fruits sort of hanging down.
Yeah.
This is the plane trees that you see all over London that make my eyes itch
yes.
when this starts happening.
Yeah.
Was she in London at this time?
Yes, she was, and spent a lot of time in London, and she studied at the Slade as well, now part of University College London. And so for people who are familiar with these trees, as you say, it's a very kind of evocative image, definitely.
And of course, one of the things that really sort of sets the whole thing off is, yes, it's on cream paper, but this lovely background colour, the sort of the wash almost that she's got behind it. Tonally, everything just works so elegantly. And, going back to composition, even that little clump of elements of the fruit that have broken away in the bottom the bottom, sort of sitting alongside the monogram, it's just all so perfectly balanced.
It is, isn't it?
I mean, there's that phrase in Japanese called wabi-sabi, where things are slightly off centre, and because of that it holds everything together through the tension of the work, and it feels like Anna's really managed to nail that here. So
we've kind of moved from England to the Near East, as it was then called. She was the wife of a diplomat, which meant that she was able to travel a lot more, and she was from Birkenhead, so not very far from where we're standing today. So I think she would have seen herself as being very faithful to what she saw of the people who lived in, well, specifically this is Jordan, the banks of the Red Sea. And she was very interested in the lives of Indigenous people and felt that she was, yes, faithfully recording their lives, and she was concerned with preserving it as well and making sure that how they'd lived for time immemorial was still the case.
What I love about this is the heat. You feel the heat, don't you? That sand is so warm, and the shadows that are being cast are so beautifully observed. You've got this lovely sense that the camels have just come out of the sea.
Yes, you can see the footprints,
yeah, exactly.
Can't you?
So they've obviously been paddling around, keeping cool. And then the touch that I think, And I don't know if it's accidental or by design, but on the mountaintops in the distance here, there's no pigment, for example. So it's almost like you can either feel the sort of the geology of the mountain itself and that it's bare, or that the sun has sort of hit it slightly, and you've got that lovely haze, the heat haze, which she seems to have observed as well. So it's really well put together, and of course its power is also in this letterbox.
It's deceptively simple, isn't it? Because it's got just these sort of almost 3 bands of colour, but then, as you say, the more you look, the more you can see this variation, and the skill with which she's used the watercolour to her advantage, and that kind of haze that you would get in the hot country that just really comes out. I think it's really beautiful. Now here we have quite a different painting, again, much darker, much moodier.
And this is a woman artist who's really gone large, quite brave.
I think that's a really good word for Sheila Fowle, who's the artist. And this is of Cumbria, which has many landscapes that we really associate with landscape art, the Lake District, but this is outside the national park. It's working class Cumbria, it's still rural, but it's a very different view from those we might expect.
It's funny, isn't it? Because it makes me think about the dark Satanic Mills, but of course they were urban scenes, weren't they, more often than not? And here we are, you're going back to the sublime. This is the sublimity of nature. You can see the mountains in the distance, but humankind has imposed itself on the landscape, and this is the equipment, the stuff that ravages the land in a way.
Yes, it's an industrial rural landscape, and Fell's father was a coal miner. She grew up quite poor. Again, she's quite different from a lot of the more genteel, better off artists that we've already looked at. And she did go to art school in London, but she was homesick for where she lived in northwest Cumbria, Aspatria, and then she came back and she depicted predominantly, almost exclusively, the landscape that she knew so well. But it's very moody, it's very grim almost, and the darkness, again, it almost feels as if it's just brown and black, but the more you look, the more you see.
Yeah, when I think about landscape painting from this period, it was quite dark as a whole, wasn't it? Even male artists, female artists, they were going out into these dramatic landscapes. Think about Kathleen Williams, the Welsh artist, for example, and they were quite dark tones. And you wonder about the politics of the time, what was going on, whether or not that informed the colour palette that artists used, because it wasn't just about what was fashionable at the time. I'm also thinking about Graham Sutherland or John Piper and their colour palettes. That palettes move through fashionable moments, don't they?
Yes. And she said of the Cumbrian landscape that the colour and the weather suited the colours that she wanted to use. It all kind of came together, and she was very, very interested in the browns and the greens and the greys. And when you go to these places, you think, oh, those are the colours. I see red as well, kind of dark reds. But I do think it's representative of that post-war 20th century movement of looking at the landscape again with that more industrial influence. It's almost like a painting of 3/3. When I look at the bottom section, it's very much about the mining. Then you've got the drama of the landscape in the second section, and then it's almost heavenly, like an apotheosis with all those clouds at the top. So you feel the presence of an almighty being in the way. So it's that sort of conflict between man, God, and nature, all in the one painting. Yes. And you really get a sense of the energy of the brushstrokes here, don't you, as well? This is a big movement. It's very sort of gestural. It's not like those delicate watercolours that we saw at the beginning of the show. This is much more energetic and physical. So we actually acquired this from the very first John Moores Painting Prize in 1957, which shows that she was such an important 20th century artist. How fantastic that whole competition has actually developed an entire collection within the organisation as well, that celebrates contemporary art of that moment. Wow, you're really pushing the boundaries with this one, Jessie. I can work out what it is, but mainly from the title of the work. That helps, presumably. Definitely. But what was the intention behind the artist's thinking? Is it a landscape? Well, again, I think it's questioning what a landscape can be and what we can recognise as a landscape, and asking us to think again. So Clough did quite figurative work earlier on in her career, and then she moved to abstraction in the 1960s, but she was always interested in landscape, and particularly urban landscape. So again, it's disrupting that idea of what we see as worthy of a landscape painting. But this is the complete reduction of landscape to just form and colour.
And that form is essentially a leaf, which presumably is this area here. But
but it could be one of the others as well, couldn't it?
Well, I guess it could be, and it's about reading it in that space, isn't it? What I love about it is the texture of the paint, the way it's applied. It's almost like it's got sand in it or something, and it changes the texture when you look at certain areas. It sort of got that range and variety to it.
Yes. So what she's done, instead of showing variety in the specifics of the landscape, I suppose, in comparison to what we've already looked at, it's about, as you say, texture and feeling, perhaps. So each block of colour has a different texture and feeling to it, as it might if you were actually in the landscape.
And she's very much an artist of her time, because they were all, you think about Victor Passmore, you think about Henry Moore, Barbara Hepworth, they were all reducing form down to its simplest element. I guess on the back of Cubism as well, you know, it's all coming out of that. Sort of how can we invent a new language, you know, which is essentially what artists are always trying to do, is to bring a new language to bear, a new interpretation. So it feels very, very personal, and it's got this fantastic sort of period frame in it as well. That Hessian that they all loved using.
I know. I wanted to show that landscape can reflect all of the artistic movements that you see, and you know, as any genre can in art, and that it's not static, and it's not just pretty pictures of pretty places, but it can be very innovative and exciting, and that's what so many of these artists were doing, and Clough just pushes it to perhaps its logical extreme, I don't know.
Yeah, and once you get over the fact that it is a landscape and the leaf and the differences in the sort of textures, you then start to understand that one of its strengths is that tension that sits there, that leaf sort of tentatively balanced, if that is the leaf, as you say, that object beautifully painted with that subtle coloration. It just sort of back to wabi-sabi again, you know, something that is right but not quite right, and there's a tension there that holds the whole thing together, and there it sits right at the centre. I mean, it feels to me with this exhibition, I mean, it's been a wonderful, wonderful tour. I feel very, very privileged to have been taken around it, that at the beginning of the show, you must have had to really, really struggle and hunt hard to pull those women out of the landscape tradition in order to construct those early rooms, you know, with amethyst, for example. But you must have been positively bombarded by female artists working in the landscape tradition in the later rooms. How did you manage to narrow down your choice?
Well, you're right. I mean, once I started looking, there was just so much possibility. If this exhibition had been completely unrestricted, you know, it could have filled
the Royal
dozens
Academy.
of rooms, the Royal Academy. But I wanted to make sure that those quite specific ideas of a woman's presence in the landscape, figures, detail, that those were shown, but also those ideas of innovation and different mediums being used by these artists to explore the landscape and their view of it. So, you know, we've kind of in many ways barely scratched the surface with what we've looked at, but I think all the artists, you know, they were well known in their day if they weren't contemporary. They were active in art circles, and I wanted to show that women were very, very present in the art world. Maybe we've forgotten them, but I don't think they were as neglected as we might think, and that was really like the driving force of the selecting the exhibition.
Great to know that the National Museum of Liverpool continues to collect them. I mean, I think you've made a really provocative an exhibition that I think will make all of us a lot more thoughtful about what landscape means, and certainly anyone leaving here, going out into port sunlight and then beyond, will look at landscape with completely fresh eyes. So thank you very much, Jessie.
Well, thank you for joining me.